This is the Andres Segovia Show.
Hey everyone, it's Andres, and today's topic is Benghazi yet again. Now, I wasn't planning on doing an intro. I was just going to publish the interview as is, but I feel I need to include this beforehand. See, my guest today, I had planned months in advance to have on. I just needed to pick up his book, read it before, I booked the guest, and then we talked about it. So I could not have planned it any better that by the time I had him on the show, Benghazi was going to be in the news again for all the wrong reasons again. Is it ever on the news for any good reason? For those of you following the Benghazi saga, you're probably well aware of the controversies that's kind of reached a boiling point in January 2025 with respect to accusations that were levied against the GRS co-authors of the book 13 Hours. The GRS team were being accused of either lying, exaggerating, or outright fabricating the heroics of that night. Of course, the GRS team defended themselves, and none more loudly than John Tig Tigan. Now, I did not intend on getting into that subject with my guest, Mr. Bradley Podliska, on this episode. However, I do bring up the subject. We kept talking about it after we recorded, and I kind of wish that did make the cut, but it wasn't recorded at that point, and I had the thread at the ready. So Mr. Podliska had created an X thread that I'll be leaving on the links at theandresegovia.com that I'll be sharing with you at the conclusion of this recorded interview. I decided to include it because I believe it's prudent that you are aware that technically these attacks and accusations are not new. Apparently, these were already recorded back during one of the Benghazi investigations. So I just think it's interesting that information that's been contradicted is resurfacing somehow, some way, but something I think I'll save for when I talk to another member of the GRS team on my show. But until then, here's my conversation with Bradley Podliska. I'd like to welcome on to the Andres Segovia Show, Mr. Bradley Podliska. He is the author of the book Fire Alarm, which is right over my shoulder. Mr. Podliska, it is a pleasure to have you on the program today. For those who may not know you, by all means, please let them know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, welcome, Andres. I'm Bradley Podliska. I'm a former investigator with the U.S. House Select Committee on Benghazi. I currently work as a civilian for the Air Force as a professor, and I'm a lieutenant colonel retired in the Air Force Reserve. So with that said, I would just like to say that all the views I'm going to express today are my own and not those of the government, and certainly not those of any of the politicians, particularly I'm not on the Benghazi, or that were on the Benghazi committee.
Understood. And I guess before anything else, thank you for your service. And I guess to kick it all off here is, well, I finished reading your book in a timely manner too. I finished it last night as we go on to record this, so it came in very handy. And one of the first things I meant to ask you when we first got connected is I noticed that the book wasn't like the traditional publication routes. It's not a mass production book per se. It's like you said, it's an academic book, so it's more like a textbook, if you will. What was the reason for that?
Sure. Well, so certainly this is an academic textbook. I had to spend time writing about what Americans would consider to be common sense. And that is when politicians investigate a serious matter, politicians are going to screw it up. And they're going to do so for political purposes. And so the point of my book was to prove that this is common sense, that politicians are going to screw up an investigation of a very serious matter and something that should be investigated. And then second, okay, because they screwed it up, what was missed as a result of that? What is the truth when it comes to these crises? And so that's the purpose of Fire Alarm.
Yeah, and as soon as I noticed, like, whoa, it's a short read. So when I finally got the book in my hands and I opened it, you have a lot of pages of notes in there. That's a lot of research. How long did it take you to put this together?
So I actually had used a lot of my notes from the Benghazi committee dating back to 2015. With that said, I presented papers at academic conferences between 2015 and 2021. But it took me about a year, I would say, solid of researching and writing. And the reason for the citations in there is I wanted to be able to prove everything that I said. So, for example, the F-16s, I went into the testimony of the military officers that testified about the F-16s and whether or not they could hot pit and signal and all that before getting to Libya. I actually wanted the primary source documents to get to the truth. of what was going on. So anything that's in the book is backed up by fact.
Yeah, and that's what matters in any investigation, honestly. But in particular, this still, what, 12 and a half years later, very hot button issue in American politics. And I told you I like to get into why that matters. That's kind of how you close out your book too. But before that, I think what's really important, and which is why I was glad to pick up your book. It was brought to my attention because of Sarah Adams had made a post, and I saw you weighing in, and I saw, oh, he has a book out. So I was happy to get it, and for me, I'm not someone that just covers Benghazi. I investigate Benghazi to the extent that I can, and I think what's been of benefit has been being able to speak to those that lived it. So my first guest was Mark Geist. In fact, I am wearing the crest of his organization, Shadow Warriors Project, charitable foundation to help the Shadow Warriors because they didn't have any recourse. Also have his dog Roan right behind me guarding my coffee mugs. So and I have some other stuff here from some of the folks that were there. I never thought that getting into this would lead me down this road where I'd be connected with and these individuals and be able to call some of them my friends. And now that kind of extends further out, being able to connect with someone like you. I think what's important is not just to get the testimony from those that were there on the ground, and I've interviewed them with the exception of Tig. I've interviewed Oz, Tonto, and Boone, and of course Sarah, to hear from them in their perspectives and everything they got, and I haven't heard any contradictions from them on what they've experienced. Maybe some clear details from one or the other because of who they are and where they were at the time. And then when it comes to people writing about Benghazi, I've ignored all that. Your book is one that I was excited to pick up for that very research. But when I say investigation, wasn't it like multiple investigations or just multiple phases to this?
Yeah, so there was 10 total congressional investigations into Benghazi, and the Benghazi Committee was the 10th investigation. With that said, though, any of the prior investigations only looked at a small part of it. So, for example, HIPSI looked at the intelligence picture that was going on. Armed Services Committee looked at the military operations that were associated with it. So Benghazi Committee basically had the comprehensive examination of everything before, during, and after the attacks.
And that was, I keep thinking 2015, but how was that the year? 2015?
So the committee, it's going to be approved in May of 2014. And it's really going to start to kick off in September of 2014. And then it's going to go into hyperdrive in March of 2015 after the New York Times article came out with Clinton's been using a private server and everything else.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because these things take time, and some of them try to do the theatrics and stuff. All sides are guilty of that, and just trying to bring all that attention. I have a much different perspective on some conclusions certain individuals, including someone that you might be acquainted with, might have come to terms in one of their books. But you were involved with the 10th investigation? The 10th?
Yes. So I was a staff member on the Benghazi Committee there with Sarah Adams.
Yeah. And you were, I think it's might have been a little different though. I think Sarah was brought in as a kind of advisor. Is that how you would also say, because you said you were a staffer, but you were more at an advisory role or how?
So my official title was investigator, and Sarah's, I believe, the senior advisor. Yeah. And then we had staff members that had the title of attorney, or I'm sorry, counsel. That said, these teams, the titles were almost meaningless. This was very much a team effort, an investigative effort to look into Benghazi. And so I was working, for example, with the chief counsel. I would go down the document room and look at documents with him, as I would with anyone else on the D.
Okay. And I'm curious, when did you know you were being picked? Because it's not something I'm assuming you volunteered for. I'm assuming that you were tasked like, hey, we could use your services here.
Yeah, so I had worked in the intelligence community, and so I had very much had a front row to Benghazi at the time. And so basically through word of mouth, I knew the staff director through friends. And so I was able to get my resume to the staff director for the Benghazi Committee and was hired based on my own experiences with the Benghazi attack.
I see. And when you say you had a front row seat, so is we're talking about some of those intelligence failures from or what we see intelligence failures or shortcomings on that day.
Certainly, I know that in the report and the conclusion, both from Benghazi Committee and I believe HIPSI, was that there wasn't any intelligence that could have prevented the attack in the area. So this was basically a blind spot for the intelligence community before this happened.
When we talk military, when we talk intelligence, are we talking about the State Department and the Pentagon? I'm coming as someone that's the average American citizen trying to make sense of it all because it just feels like everything just melts together. But are we talking about both the Pentagon and the State Department?
In terms of intelligence?
Yes.
So you basically have the intelligence community, which is going to be comprised of, there's going to be military integrated with that. And then the State Department, which also has much more of an analysis shop as opposed to a collection shop. And so they're tangentially going to be involved with that. When it came to Benghazi, it's going to be a combination of those national assets and any kind of military tactical assets that are in place. And unfortunately, as these committees have found, there was a blind spot when it came to any kind of intelligence warning there in Libya.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I'm just thinking about all that bureaucratic red tape and everybody having a speech together. Because when we hear Hillary Clinton, she was the Secretary of State at the time, but it's the Department of Defense, the one that's responsible for any military action and stuff. So that's why it's like just trying to follow everything is just like such a wide net. Like, oh my goodness, this is so much. That's you put it in the simplest of terms in your book, which I appreciate because we'll be able to follow along a little better. But when I try to like just expand further out, it's like, man, that's a lot to turn from. But I want to keep it to more of the, I guess the basics, because not only did you get what you said, a front row seat to, I guess, when events were going down, but you also got to see how this was being politicized in real time. But I'll save this point for a little later. But did you feel there was a turning point, though? I mean, I got something from your book, but did you feel, or when did you feel there's a turning point in that nothing was going to get resolved to this investigation?
So in my book, the emphasis is basically since 1995, there's been this party takeover of investigations where they're running out of the speaker's office. Mm-hmm. And so I was, front row to Benghazi with the Benghazi committee, and I write about this in my book. Basically, if you're a party loyalist, which is dictated by having previous Capitol Hill experience, you got these special assignments on the committee and to investigate. And what was a necessary condition was being a party loyalist. What was only a sufficient condition was being actually competent in your job. And so that's why in my book I make the point that things such as a military angle, when it comes to Benghazi, were not fully investigated.
Definitely dropping the ball there. And also speak to why it kind of goes together, why all this matters. Because it's easy to point fingers, though, to say that it was the Republicans, because they were the ones that were spearheading a lot of this to try to nail Clinton, it seems, because she was the front runner for the Democrat Party. This is where I say that even those that were more in Washington and not the average American kind of miss out on the points, because I did read a certain book. You probably know what it is, but I won't mention it on the air. And I was interested in it because there's an individual that was there not on the ground, but in the area when all this went down. And before I could even read the book, and I got it on my hands, like, oh, I'm looking forward to reading this. So as soon as I opened the book and I just look at the table of contents, immediately when I look, like, great, I know what this is going to be. It's going to be Benghazi gave us Trump. That's the way I see it. A lot of people that whenever they talk about some of the failures that happened and how the Republicans also were very political, because they did politicize it. But even the gain that a lot of people in Washingtonian circles or the Beltway, I don't think they understand that maybe the poll numbers might have shown it for Clinton, but right up until the election, no one gave a chance for Trump to win. So to me, the narrative that that Benghazi gave us Trump, that's the way I phrase it, by the way. It's just a nutshell of it all. I think that's still missed. And there's individuals to this day that still kind of blame it like that. And I'm like, no, but yes, Trump did have some of the Benghazi heroes on the stage. They did endorse him. So that's what people kind of point to it. But even Republicans were against Trump. So I I want to. It's hard to disassociate it because a lot of noise came from that anyway, and the lock her up chants and all that. Yes, I want accountability for everybody that failed. But at the same time, and if you saw the episode with Tonto that I did, I even said last I checked, she wasn't the one that attacked the walls at the Special Missions compound. She wasn't the one attacking at the Annex. So what did we entirely miss? And it's what you said, the military angle. The talking points is still. That one still infuriates because it was a lie that was still perpetuated later. And I don't think anything really truly came of that to say, like, look, that was a flat out lie, but messages were being confounded and confused. In your book, you provide these hypothesis models and different phases and things. I don't remember because I had to read it a little quicker. But this is a textbook that needs to be studied, not just read. What would you apply? Which model were you applying to the talking points?
Yeah, so certainly with the talking points, this became the administration. Basically, they didn't want a failure before the 2012 election, and so the talking points became and we can get into actually what's the nexus between the military response and the talking points. This is a 7:30 p.m. interagency meeting that occurs on the night of the attacks, and at this point, you basically have those who are trying to respond to the crisis. Gentlemen such as Leon Panetta, and then those who are trying to cover politically for the crisis. And those go by the name of Ben Rhodes and Jake Sullivan. And so that group there, in particular, Jake Sullivan, is going to write talking points after the 7:30 meeting where they make a really, really bad assumption. And that is it's a hostage rescue involving Ambassador Stevens, and the attacks are over, and the attacks occur because of this anti-Islamic video.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good point in mentioning the hostage, because that's what they assumed, and based on some of my understandings that, and I could be wrong, and if I'm fact checked, I know I'll hear it from certain people, but it's with respects to the intent that these terrorists had was not to kill the ambassador, but to actually abduct him, so that. I don't know you heard about that, but supposedly that was their aim, because of prisoner exchange kind of thing. So it's not to say that it was all that far off from what was initially assumed, but there was still intel that was being muddled. It's like, oh, the attack is over. No, it wasn't. That's why it's called 13 hours, point of contact to when they finally take off from the Benghazi airport. But FAST was put together. This is the part where I kind of lose myself because I'm not in that world. But there's elements that were in Germany and other parts that were kind of being cobbled together to try to respond. Can you walk us through what that response was and the timing?
Yeah, so certainly I think it's probably best to go back to actually January of 2012. And there was an American by the name of Jessica Buchanan and a Danish citizen by the name of Thiested, and they were taken hostage by Somali pirates. And so when Leon Panetta, Secretary of Defense at the time, is notified there's been an attack in Benghazi, Ambassador Stevens is missing, Leon Panetta is automatically going to assume, I'm facing a January 2012 Somalia incident.
I see.
For this. And what did Leon Panetta do? Well, he ordered what's referred to as Con Plan 0300, which is a special forces hostage rescue plan. And so this gets into his mind, and this is what's going to basically all the events of that night. He's going to run a replay of January 2012. Rescues, and it's very successful. He rescues Jessica Buchanan and the Danish citizen Thiested at the time. Now, unfortunately, that's not what is occurring in Libya. This is a full-blown assault. I know you've talked to Tonto on those guys. These guys are not there to, make friends and take hostages and make monetary demands. These guys are there to kill Americans.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, with the units that he ordered, Secretary Panetta, there's not going to be any chance for a rescue. And oh, by the way, the assumption is also, and all these guys testified to this, is violence is over. We have time. We have to focus on the long-term damages that this anti-Islamic film has done. And therefore, we have to run another subsequent military operation referred to as Jukebox Lotus, basically which will be to send American forces in for regional stability. So that is their aim that night, is to set up for hostage rescue and for regional stability. It is not to do a military operation directed at saving Americans at the CIA Annex.
Yeah. And aren't they not supposed to assume? Isn't that what it's like? Do not assume.
So in my book, and this is where I talk about what's referred to as the joint planning process, which sounds like a very bureaucratic name, but this is doctrine that all military officers know and are trained in order to advance in your career. You have to actually be considered an expert, certified in this process. And the entire point of the joint planning process is, yes, we understand there's assumptions you have to make, but throughout the process, you should be updating your model and your process with information in order to cut back on those assumptions. You should not take an assumption at the starting point and at the ending point not have done anything to try to turn that assumption into fact. Because what happens if you have an assumption, it's going to turn into risk. That risk could turn into mission failure. And that's exactly what happened with the Benghazi attack. Assumption is Stevens is hostage. Violence is over. We have time. There's no process going on to update that information. And in fact, they're actually going to make the problem worse at this 7:30 meeting, which we can talk about. In terms of a military plan, this is a great case study and something we should learn from in how not to respond to a crisis.
Yeah. And was it the 7:30 meeting also that one's like, all right, everybody, that's lunch. That's it. We're wrapped. Let's go home. Something like that.
Yeah, basically. So in their point of view, and this is something that's unique about Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's going to read a note saying, aha, a blonde-haired gentleman has been taken hostage. Everyone says that's Ambassador Stevens. We were right about our assumption. And so at the 7:30 meeting, then you get Jake Sullivan who goes off and writes the talking points. The military is going to say, good for us, pat us on the back. We've actually ordered all the forces we're going to send to Libya. And in fact, half of them weren't even going to Libya. You have things like the SIF and the Special Operating Forces from the U.S. actually going to a staging base. Once again, because they thought they had time to set up for this operation. They basically pat themselves on the back, and by 10:30, basically all the leaders in the U.S. government are home and in bed before the CIA Annex is even ordered.
Some people might look at this, well, that was just one incident in having to control so many things that happen around the world. Should we have stopped everything for what's happening here? I do argue that the answer was yes, if someone was actually paying attention. I believe, it was in Tanto's explanation with you, Ron, I think, making the case like they have the feed. They were watching, someone was watching what was transpiring, and that was not a hostage situation, especially when the gunmen kept coming back over and over again, and now they changed locations to a different coordinate. So someone wasn't talking to somebody, but I think what wasn't, I don't recall seeing it in the book. This was discovered much later. From what I understand, and I think this goes into play too, was that the station chief at the Annex, aside from the fact that he was lying to the GRS guys and telling them that February 17th, Martyr Militia was going to be showing up, when in fact they had told them since the beginning that they weren't, but kept telling the GRS that, they're coming, or we're counting on them or whatever, that would have helped the GRS strategize differently if they had that information. As I understand it, I'm not asking you to confirm it, but it does take place in this. It's either the seventh man, aka Hush, was, I don't know if he's liaison, whatever, for the GRS, was also, as I understood it, downplaying the events that were occurring there. And I imagine, because I haven't heard anything concrete, but I would imagine or assume, and I hate to assume, that's what also came into play that affected some of the actions from Washington to say, well, we're getting intel that they got it in hand.
So from what I understand, and talking to Tonto and those guys, is on the ground, they were putting up the chain of, hey, we're under attack here. This isn't, no one was mentioning a protest at the time. This is a full-blown attack. And I know Gregory Hicks was making callbacks to D.C., including speaking to Clinton at the time, saying how bad the violence was. So I'm not familiar with Hush's testimony of where he was downplaying things. What I can say, though, is that 7:30 meeting, once again, we have all the major players are there. This is an interagency meeting, including Clinton is leading this meeting, that they have assumed that the violence is over. Now, this is while the guys are still holed up at the CIA Annex, defending themselves before the mortar attack or anything. They've concluded the attack is over. And oh, by the way, it's, due to this anti-Islamic film, and there's been a protest and all that stuff.
That's a good point, actually.
It comes back to that, once you have the joint planning process, certainly in the military, you should be updating and asking questions downrange. Are you guys still being shot at? Would be a good question to ask. And then adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and I'm glad you emphasized that, because that actually adds more to, I would say, the failures on Washington's part in all this, because even if hushed the testimony that downplaying events that were over there, the assumption was made. And if it was 7:30 Eastern, what time relatively was that in Libya? I don't remember how many.
Libya would have been 6 hours ahead. So was that 2?
Yeah.
10:30? 1:30?
Yeah, something like that, like 1:30. Yeah, that was between the first and second attacks, if I'm not mistaken, on the Annex. Yeah.
Yes,
they were hit.
30. Literally, the GRS team from Tripoli has landed at Benghazi Airport, and they're going to have a 3.5-hour delay at Benghazi Airport where they're not able to get to the Annex. And so literally, as those guys are landing in Benghazi, you had this government meeting back in Washington starting where they've already concluded that the violence is over. And so for Hush or anyone else saying, trying to downplay the violence, well, in my opinion, that can't be the case, because Team Tripoli, comprised of these two special operators and then the GRS team, why are they flying from Tripoli? And oh, by the way, they're having to get their own private aircraft to fly from Tripoli to Benghazi if everything's okay. And then, of course, that's also conflated. I know the station chief, or the chief of base at the time, was actually still trying to keep people there to collect intelligence. So it just gets into people's crisis behavior can be a little bit, confounding.
There are a lot of things that happen in a span of 24 hours that is just head scratching, honestly, on just absolutely everywhere. Meanwhile, it does feel like, I would say, 7 guys, 6 on the ground there at the Annex, and Glenn Doherty, being that they were the only ones trying to do anything. Let me ask you about the Tripoli team. This is actually good, because I have questions about this, especially since not really much I feel is said about the Tripoli team. But from what I've been able to gather, this was put together. It's basically the embassy in Tripoli, right?
Yes.
AFRICOM is there? Was it?
No. So AFRICOM, for all intents and purposes, was not involved in Libya at the time.
Oh, okay.
Libya was very much a State Department led show. This was supposed to be part of Clinton's smart power. Now, with that said, there was still military there, including those 2 special operators that volunteered to go into Benghazi.
Yeah, and you emphasize volunteer, which I believe is very important here, because as I understood it, no one assigned them to go; they volunteered to go. And depending on who you speak to, I understood these to be like gym buddies of Glenn, and it's like, can we go to, kind of thing. So they volunteered to go. Is that close? Yeah,
certainly. I mean, these guys are American heroes, in my opinion. So you have the 5 GRS, including a linguist, who not even combat trained for this type of thing. They're and then the 2 Delta Force guys that are volunteering to go in. And like I said, getting their own plane and everything, that is completely, that's what America's based on, is that type of, heroic behavior.
Heroic behavior, yeah. And I've had the GRS
on my show. I think I told you, and I've asked each of them, not all at the same time. So I asked them each individually, and I keep asking the same question to each of them, like, all right, I want to hear from you. Why did you go? It was not your business. Americans were in trouble. It's like, that's it. That's all they needed to know. They didn't go asking for pronouns or their political persuasion or anything like that. It was, hey, Americans are in trouble, and in the middle of a very dangerous place. Hey, to safety be damned, they wanted to go help. And depending on whose side you're actually believing, they defied a stand-down order, which I strongly believe that they did, that they defied a stand-down order. Even if it wasn't a stand-down order, they were delayed 20 minutes. That's pretty much standing down. So they ended up going, and in all this, that's why I'm asking with the AAA team, because it was a volunteer force.
Yeah, we can get into the units that were selected for this response, but certainly the team Tripoli, to their credit, they made things happen. The actual military response is actually going to take 23 hours, and these guys are responding, catching a plane within hour or two time of the attack starting, which is, to me is pretty crazy. Very, very much very brave.
Yeah, and I agree. It's still a brave thing. The downside comes when it feels like, you've seen it, and we'll touch on it maybe a little. It's not my fight, but it's still, when you're attacking friends of mine, I'm gonna be pissed. So, people draw from the movie, and I've seen people chiming into comments like, "But weren't they tasked with documenting destruction?" It's like, first off, the 13 Hours movie is still a movie. A surprisingly very well done movie by a director no one gives credit to. So, like, just that alone is a feat in of it itself. But I was actually really surprised how well that movie was put together. I'm a film aficionado, critic, and I used to do something called the Critic Corner. So I did this for about 10 years, and going to see movies. The big highlight of my movie career was to be able to say that Warner Brothers invited me, when I was part of the viral campaign, to go see The Dark Knight, the one with Heath Ledger and Christian Bale, way before anybody else. And I had one of the first reviews in the world to be able to say, just go watch it, I'm not spoiling anything. So to me, that's the highlight of my career. I retired happily about a year later. I was like, I'm done. But when it comes to movies, 13 Hours was definitely one of those that, like, I'm Michael Bay, not interested. So I didn't see it in the theater. So eventually, when I did get around to it, and I'm like, I feel really stupid for turning this down, because I know of Benghazi. It's just that I didn't give Michael Bay credit that he would treat it with that care, and he did, which is awesome. Which is why I probably think that some people take it as gospel. Like, read the book, but it's actually interesting how the movie's less dramatic than the book. And one thing that Sarah told me was like, Andres, if there is an award for someone that knows the most about movies, I give it to you. It's like, wow, you know this thing just in and out. It's like, oh yeah, especially when I love a project, and when I know that love and care was put together. There is, however, something that's come of contention with respects to whatever might have happened. They were a volunteer force. They were recognized, but it doesn't feel like the GRS were. And I think that's documented very well. They were not recognized for their heroic efforts. And then because it becomes a political football, and because of where they align politically or who they intended to support, they were thrown a lot of shade at. And I think that is awful. That's not how, like you said, it was heroic efforts to even go down there, knowing that you're going to a firefight, not knowing what you're getting into. Well, yeah. And I also think that those that did the heavy lifting deserve better than how they've been treated. I feel that the GRS have been thrown under the bus. That's really what it feels like. And now it just feels like more shades being thrown at them. So as much as we've understood, no one was tasked, because it was a volunteer force. So no one was tasked with, say, recovering the body of Ambassador Christopher Stevens. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, certainly. The Team Tripoli was all volunteers, and the two Delta Force operators that got the medals, just for the fact they volunteered, I think they're deserving of those medals. But at the same time, the GRS team, from what I understand, was mistreated, and certainly weren't shown accolades when they got back to the U.S. and back to the CIA. And I think that was completely and totally wrong. And it should be changed. The fact that two guys happen to be in the military and there's an award process for that, and then the other ones were former military but happened to be civilian at the time, and they were not given awards, I think is a shame, and it should be corrected.
Yeah. We do have 2 stars on the CIA wall devoted to Roan and Bub, which is, well, to me, I don't. Well, those motors were placed there ahead of time. Absolutely, it's whatever happened in having all this chatter lately, where it seems like the volunteer force that showed up is now at odds with the GRS heroes and all that. I'll talk to the guys about that. But it's just like, seriously? Even this? Like, that's what upsets me. It's like 12 and a half years later, I think I mentioned this before we started rolling, that we still have people that miss the mark, left and the right. I just had a conversation last week with somebody, they're politically agnostic, but they're like, yeah, I don't know much about Benghazi. And that's where I separate myself from people that write books. I don't just pick up a book because someone wrote about Benghazi. I hate that. Your book, I needed to get it because you were involved in it. And I didn't even know I was going to agree with your conclusions. And I thought for the most part, I thought it was pretty even-handed if I felt a bit apologetic to maybe one side or over the other. But accountability is needed. The Republicans dropped the ball on the investigation. They wanted to get a political points out of it. And to those on the left, the Republicans did get political points out of it. No, they didn't. And then you have the left that will just never see, just never go beyond a stupid talking points. Like, really, we're still talking about that debunked nonsense. Your book is very.
That's
sorry. Go ahead.
Point of my book is that we haven't had accountability, and along with it, we haven't had reforms. And exactly. Usually after disasters, after crises that end in disasters such as 9/11, Pearl Harbor. Grenada invasion in '83 was a success, but still we get Goldwater Nichols as a result of some of the mishaps there between the services. And so we haven't had any reforms from this. And part of the reforms I would like to see is never to see the military use a con plan without going through the joint planning process again. Right. That would be, my recommendation is one way to fix this thing.
Yeah, and I'm not involved in any of that. I don't know how best it can be fixed. All I know is just stop letting politicians run wars. That's all I can say. If we're not in the region that we don't belong in there, it's like, then what the heck are we doing? That really is. And after the botched withdrawal of Afghanistan, it's just more to the point. It's like, stop leaving politicians in control of anything. I'm sick and tired of it. Nothing good as I've seen in modern day politics has ever come of it. And the ones that pay for it are the generations that we lost an entire generation, literally. Global war on terror. How many dead? And it's a tragedy. But the importance of this, as you say, was like a disaster. I try to explain that to Tanto. I'm like, that in all the recordings I've done, that's the one where I try to explain. I don't understand why I was drawn to this event, and why I've come this far in being able to cover it, to be able to document the truth of this. But the fallout of not taking accountability for the failure in leaderships from the top on down, from the Democrat Party and Republican Party, yes, absolutely. Especially those that were talking about, yes, Clinton. I don't put that much on Obama, but hey, some people might. But to me, State Department, Pentagon officials, those that failed, you guys need to be accountable. Hold them accountable. What that accountability looks like, to each their own. But Republicans also failed to act on any of that. If you guys knew that there were failures and this was a terrorist attack, what have you done to stop these terrorists from crossing our borders, from putting them on some kind of list, negotiating with other countries to have them extradited for justice? Nothing. And then if you follow the trail, that's why Boone and Sarah have been doing fantastic work on the open source community to gather intel. After Know Thy Enemy, they've come out with 2 more investigations, not to mention updates to the attackers of Benghazi. But some of these guys being connected to October 7th in Israel, and then even Afghanistan. It's like, guys, they never stopped. We've been distracted by the noise. And all these years later, that's why it matters that this singular event has shook up Washingtonian politics. Like, I don't give a damn about you politicians. Truly, I don't. You guys are the swamp. Get out. Put competent people in there. I really don't care. But these are the ones we're relying upon to get something done. That's why this whole thing is frustrating, and Americans are paying for it, whether it's tax dollars or with their lives, with terror attacks. We don't have all the details per se about what happened in New Orleans, but we will if we're to believe Al Qaeda 2.0 and Project 2025 of what they intend to do. That's a scary prospect. If you've been following Sarah and Boone's investigations, it's a scary prospect of coming down, and that is in part due to the failures of any accountability and taking action about what happened and finding those attackers that killed 4 Americans of ours that day.
Yeah, that's the problem with all this is become so politicized. Is that if you're Democrat, you say, "Oh, our Republicans are obsessed with Benghazi," and then if you're Republican, in turn, you say, "Oh, Democrats are obsessed with January 6th," and neither side's talking to each other. No reforms, no accountability, no nothing. And one of the faults from Benghazi is simply an end to any kind of risk taking when it comes to American foreign policy. And so we're not seeing the military put into risky situations. We're certainly not seeing the State Department being put into risky situations. And so, as you know, Sarah has pointed out in her research, is these terrorists certainly haven't stopped working against America. We're not, as forward-leaning as we once were because there's been a shutdown in U.S. operations as a result of Benghazi.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess I'll say this point. And I know that there's a lot, particularly on the right, where they feel like, no interventionism and all that. And like, well, I would love to hold that position too. Like, we're not the world police, but great power gave us great responsibility too, to borrow a phrase from Spider-Man. But it just really, really feels that way. I think you might have mentioned it in that podcast with Tonto too, about being the world police. It's like Team America, world police. It's like it really does feel like that burden almost falls on us, and I don't like that. But I have seen through these connections and relationships I've been able to build, and having a better understanding of worldview and foreign policy about the deterrence and what's that like, and it's complicated. It's not clear cut, just like the Benghazi thing. It's so easy to just point at one thing, and like I said, just trying to just get back from this web. It's like, holy smokes, look at how wide this thread is. It's you can't just point to one thing. I guess that's why so many people still write about Benghazi and publish books. But I do hope that people can study it, and I think I've said just about enough. I could say it just because I could get very emotional about this, and I'm trying not to. It's just, and this is not what it was. I don't want to get into the emotional side of it, but education-wise, and that's why it is a touchy subject. It riles emotions,
Yeah.
But and I appreciate your contributions to what's transpired, even in the failures of our politicians in getting anything resolved. But you had mentioned in that Battle Line podcast that you were working on an update. Is there an update to your update?
So still trying to track down some of the military units that could have been called on to respond, including the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. I found testimony that the USS New York was actually offshore Djibouti. Now, Djibouti is a long ways away from Libya. We like to think that Africa is, small and enclosed, and you can get from one point to another point in a couple hours, which simply isn't the case. But there was military units in the region that weren't even considered on the attacks. And once again, that goes back to Complan 0300, where Panetta is going to select those 4 units and stick by him, thinking he's involved with the hostage rescue. And so the Marines on the USS New York off the coast of Djibouti weren't even factored into that equation. And the same with the F-16s at Aviano were also quickly, I don't even know if they were considered, but in the after-action reports, a lot of the military said, yeah, no, they shouldn't have been used. And my response to that is why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I look forward to whenever it is. Would that be another academic textbook?
No, so I'm actually working on my research. I'm actually working on the January 6th committee.
Oh,
And what they miss as a result of their investigation. And certainly it's arguably worse than what the Benghazi committee missed with its investigation in terms of the facts of what was going on.
oh, fascinating. So, yeah, and I could say a lot about that too, but with so the follow up to fire alarm isn't necessarily fire alarm two. You're focusing on the political partisanship into investigations that make these investigations fail.
Yeah, exactly. So with the January 6th committee, it's going to be the same thing as I did with Benghazi of, okay, what was missed as a result of this politicized investigation? In terms of Benghazi, we didn't know who was in charge of Obama's foreign policy in Libya after the investigation. We didn't know who actually authored those talking points. We didn't know why the military failed to respond with Benghazi. Then with January 6th committee, it's going to be, what was going on with the National Guard, and were they called out to protect the capital or not? Were they ordered to stand down? Because we got contradictory testimony on that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, especially with a lot of stuff made light in I would say the past 18 months.
Yeah, it's get through all the clutter, and this has certainly become political footballs for both sides. But much like with Pearl Harbor, much like with 9/11, Bay of Pigs, etc., it doesn't mean it does not deserve to be studied and to have the facts come out.
And I absolutely agree with that. These are pivotal moments in history that people are going to learn about in photographs.
Yeah.
And while some of us might be stuck in a time capsule, it's sometimes good to get away from it to be able to look at things objectively. So that's why I appreciate your contribution to the Benghazi saga with this book, especially since you were eyes on there in DC and stuff like that. So it really gives a perspective. And I think from my understanding that 7:30 meeting, that was the pivotal turning point in a lot of the response. So regardless of what other things I found out with who was withholding what or downplaying something on the ground in Benghazi, while these other guys were actually trying to do something about protecting American lives and trying to hold the fort while help arrived. It's something, but I don't think it would have changed what happened in Washington. So yeah, okay, but I thank you for that, and I think that's a good place that we can wrap the conversation on. But if there's any other updates you'd like to give the audience, and also tell them where they could follow you on socials and the like.
Hey, yeah, I am on X at Bradley Podliska. And so I'm not on like Instagram or TikTok, or it's TikTok's still around even. I guess it's been unbanned. But on X at Bradley Podliska.
Bradley Podliska. Yeah, and for those watching, listening, you guys know the MO. Any links and everything, including to the book Fire Alarm. Is that only available on Amazon, or was it also Barnes & Noble? I don't remember.
It should be everywhere. It is intended for academic libraries, so my apologies in advance for it being expensive. But with that said, if you go to your local college or your local university and you ask for it, it should be available.
Yeah. And I think it's very important just for the notes section for anybody looking to do research. I think your book is a must, and just to go into it objectively. So yeah, and for anybody asking, all these links will be available in the show notes accompanies episode at theundersegovia.com. Mr. Podliska, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so very much. I'll be following your work closely, and who knows, maybe I will have you on for the January 6th investigation book after it drops.
Okay. Thanks, Andres.
So here are the posts to the thread that Bradley Podliska posted. The first is interesting Benghazi committee testimony of Delta Force operator. He states the majority of the 13 hours book is not factual. He testifies that GRS agents were not on the roof nor securing the compound. However, his testimony contradicts this assertion. Next post. After arriving at the Annex, he went inside Building 3, then was on Building 3 patio just before the mortar attack, and then secured the main gate after the attack. In each instance, he, being a Delta Force operator, states that the GRS Tripoli and Benghazi team leads were with him. Now, this is from the attachment page 867 that I will read because it's pivotal here. This is after the mortar attack. This is the response that the Delta operator made. Once the mortar fire had stopped and machine gun fire had stopped, it was probably between 2 and 3 minutes afterwards. We decided to go and find out what personnel had been wounded and their status and hopefully get them medical care. We took a team of 4 guys outside the house to go on the top of the building 3 to assess the casualties from the mortar fire. That was myself, my team leader, the GRS team lead Tripoli, and Benghazi. We move around to the backside of the house. We climb up a ladder to get to the roof, 15 feet somewhere thereabouts. There is a large lip as you climb down onto the roof, which made some kind of bowl for the mortar round to hit, so it caused the shrapnel to bounce around and make it more casualty producing, which was obvious once we got up there. Everybody was wounded, obviously, from the mortar rounds. 2 were passing away as we came up to the roof. 1 was a walking wounded and had a pretty decent injury to his arm. I think it was his left arm. And the other individual, State Department individual, was laying on the ground, missing part of his leg and heavy shrapnel wounds as well. This is a very important part of the testimony because, as Mr. Podliska summarizes in the third post, the Delta Force operator's role consisted of evacuating the wounded from the roof. Taken together, his testimony confirms that the Benghazi GRS team was not in the building, not with him on the porch, and not at the main entrance. So one can infer that they were out defending the Annex. So the mere fact that the Delta Force operators, once they get out and go up on the roof and realizing there are people there, that in itself contradicts claims that are being perpetuated that supposedly the Benghazi GRS team didn't do what they said they did. There are other claims out there that need to be rebutted, but I will not do that in this episode. I'll be saving that for a future episode when I touch on Benghazi again, so stay tuned for that. But until then, make sure you are following me across the socials at the Andres Segovia, on X_Andres Segovia. All the show notes can be found at theandresegovia.com, and I'll see you on the next one.